So, we covered 15 of the greatest classic villains in Fire Emblem. It's time we have a look at the top 10 from the post-Awakening era. Yes, only 10. Some of you might be surprised to know that modern Fire Emblem villains are seldom good. Out of all of them, I'd only rank the top 3 among the best of the series overall. Sure, each game has its standouts, but compared to the older games, the bad ones are way more prominent. I may seem too harsh, but given how the modern games are held in such high regard as the mainstream standouts of the franchise, I was hoping the villains would be given as grand of a treatment, and they do eventually, but it's kind of a slow start. Nonetheless, out of the good graces of my soul, I'll try my best to pick a few more legitimate standouts in these games, even if it means scraping the bottom of the barrel. Same criteria apply as the last time. The better the design, the more interesting the character, and the more enjoyable the presence, the higher they go. And like the previous list, expect some bias going forward. Also, this goes without saying, but I'm spoiling every single one of the modern FE games here, and that includes Engage. So, proceed with caution. These are my top 10 modern Fire Emblem villains. I think a lot of people can agree that Fates doesn't have a particularly great villain lineup. Not only are the major ones absolutely hideous, even the mooks have better designs, but for all the attention they get, they're about as deep as a drop of dew. No, I mean actual dew, sheesh. To his credit, I actually enjoyed Iago quite a bit. Yeah, he has a dumb mask and could really use a shower, but he does have the persistence and snark that makes him fun to sit through. His no-nonsense attitude also makes him feel a little less like a one-dimensional yes-man, which does help make every scene with him more unpredictable, since even he doesn't always agree with Garen's orders. I think he's definitely at his best in Conquest, when he's constantly telling Corrin to supervise their loyalty to Garen. The idea of an antagonist being kept at arm's reach from the protagonist is a pretty neat one, as it challenges the hero to stay alert and keep the baddie at wit to stay alive. Granted, it could have been handled better if Corrin isn't such a dense fool who needed the plot to bend to their will to survive, but I do appreciate them trying something a little different here. Plus, it makes it all the more satisfying when you finally get to break out of his orders and put him in his place. Give him credit, for a typical sorcerer boss, he puts up quite a fight thanks to his infinite staves. Suck it, Validar. Of course, Iago is only this low because outside of Conquest, he's a basic bitch who exists solely to get his ass kicked and not much more. Still, in a streak of blandness and stupidity, I'll give Iago credit for giving me something to enjoy on the way and supplying me with all the Gilbert Gottfried jokes to make.
Suck my dark wizard nuts!
Oh boy, Awakening. I make it no secret that I find the villains to be the worst part of this game. Given their awful designs and lack of exciting presence, they just feel like second priority to everything else. That said, there is one major villain in this game that stands out well enough. Valm's steadfast conqueror, Walhart. Being the only major villain in Awakening blessed by an awesome design, Walhart left a pretty good impression as a villain who's devoted to rule the world with an iron fist. He's motivated not by a selfish draw to power, but by a genuine belief that only through calculative ruthlessness can the world achieve peace. Not only is he ruthless, he's surprisingly keen as well. Even as he's manipulated by the Grimleals, he still saw through Exilus's ruse and pinned him down to fight by his side. All in all, Walhart has some good qualities going for him. Even his lines are memorable. But despite all of that, I can't for the life of me call him a great villain. The stuff that supposedly makes him a major threat didn't come through as well as it should. What with Basilio surviving his attack, and the fact that he's a piss-easy boss due to your access to powerful child units by this point. Doesn't help that he hardly gets any screen time and is relegated to the least relevant arc in the game. I'm not too keen on him being a spot pass playable either. No shame developing villains as allies, but if they lack that development in the main story, what's the point? He still feels half-baked, and given the amount of conquerors in the series that overshadow him, Walhart's only fortune is to be a lone treasure amidst a trash pile. That's not to say I don't like Walhart. It's just that he's a 6 out of 10 at best. A decent stepping stone for better modern villains, but that's about as far as he goes. Shadows of Valentia definitely has better antagonists than the other modern Fire Emblems, but a big part of that is because it's a remake of Gaiden, so it's already borrowing a lot of elements from the old games to fare out. But like New Mystery, this game does have new villains, and they turned out pretty good. One of which is Fernand. Being the game's resident traitor, Fernand comes off as snobbish and uncompromising as you'd expect. He is staunchly classist given a history of his family being killed due to an outrage caused by commoners. As a former member of the Deliverance, he didn't take kindly to the acquaintance of Alm and his friends, and got even more triggered when Clive installed Alm as a leader to inspire the willpower of the common folk. Fernand drew the line then and there, abandoned the Deliverance, and was ready to submit to his fate. That is until the Sai decided to hand him over to Berkut. It's then when he thought he had found a man he can trust with his ideals and betrays the kingdom of Zofia for good. Fernand himself is not a victim of madness or obligation. He's in full control of his actions, which gives him avenues to see the error of his ways the more he beholds what the Regalian army and the Duma faithful will do to achieve success. Yeah, killing your old friends for giving power to commoners? Totally okay. Siding with people who uses black magic? Oh noes, what have I done? Sadly, Fernand regrets too little too late, as he falls victim to Berkut's fit of rage and dies in the gentle arms of the very people he scorned. Fernand's presence in the story adds some pretty good layers to what it previously had. Alm went from being accepted as leader without question in Gaiden to having his status challenged. Even Clive was put to question a bit more, leading to an ever-growing inner conflict that makes the dynamic within the Deliverance all the more enticing. Unfortunately, Fernand does lose a lot of points due to his good qualities being relegated to additional content, but not a trace of it in the main story. We're supposed to believe that things could have been better between him and the heroes, but when he won't even so much as try to save Mathilda from being executed, it's kind of hard to feel sorry for him. At least his death isn't as cheesy as Berkut's. His credibility as a character can always be put to question, but there's no denying that he's still an effective villain who challenges the Deliverance from inside and out. When I was making this list, I wanted to factor in as many different types of villains as I could. Sure, it's fun to bring up the usual warmonger and conqueror, but what about the politicians? They can be just as sneerable as the average big bad given some of the shady things they do, which may even cause rippling effects to the lives of other characters. This is why Bernadetta's dad is so enjoyable to me. Count Gregory von Varley is one of the high-ranking nobles of the Adrestia Empire. His daughter described him as a vicious and cruel man, putting her through egregious training to become a perfect lady, all for the sake of elevating the name of House Varley. He went as far as to tie her up in a chair to educate her, beat her commoner friend half to death as to not let her associate with the lower class, and worst of all, he didn't even buy her a Flame Station 5! Based on how he's described in Three Houses, he really does seem like the worst kind of man, who exemplifies the sort of corruption Fodlan faces. But then you see him in Three Hopes and, oh good gracious, it's even better than I could imagine. Turns out Count Varley is just a mousy, cowardly fool with a severe inferiority complex. He couldn't hold his own in a battlefield for a minute before crying for help, and was bullied so hard by Edelgard and Hubert, he eventually started shutting himself away like his daughter always does. He's so pathetic that it's hilarious, especially in contrast to what we knew about him beforehand. But if you stop to think about it, there's a surprising amount of thought put into his character. Given how much more confident his peers are, it makes sense that he will press his daughter so much as he did if it means he can have something to show over the other nobles. Even his on-screen interactions with Bernadetta comes across as more awkward than demeaning, which shows that the two did have a bit more of a nuanced chemistry than simply hating each other. And heck, the whole thing about beating up her friend? Yeah, it turns out that friend was sent to assassinate her to begin with, so Gregory was really just protecting Bernie. As horrible a person as Count Varley may be, I do appreciate that he's not just made to be a monster. He does have realistic qualities that make his impact on the world building feel more believable. But that doesn't make him any less of a bad person we enjoy crapping on. A lot of modern FE villains try way too hard to be hateable that they come across as just annoying and insubstantial. So it's refreshing to see one that's actually given a lot more thought for a change. And I definitely wish they can stay in this direction. So in summary, less this and more this. In light of the chemist archetype, it's fairly realistic that you'd find an enemy on the battlefield who shares similar values as you do, but is forced to fight you in battle due to unfortunate circumstances. And boy do I have mixed feelings for these guys. Sure, I do like me some tragic antagonists that challenge my desire to recruit anyone I wish, but most of them just repeat the same "I'm a knight, I have to fight for my king no matter what" routine over and over again. The more I come across these guys, they start to feel kinda samey and manipulative, especially when they don't do enough to really justify feeling sorry for them. These chemist likes rarely do much to stick out over the other, but I do manage to find one that really stood the test of time.
Let us avoid senseless slaughter.
Yep, it's Mustafa. For all the crap I give to Awakening's villains, I'll give him credit for actually having my favorite version of the noble enemy. Anyways, Mustafa is what you will expect. A good man leading an army under the thumb of an evil authoritarian. Mustafa's case is that his family is threatened by gangrel, so whether he likes it or not, he can't defect from Plegia's army. Despite this, he doesn't turn a deaf ear to the right thing, as during Emerin's death, he was there to take her plea to heart. Understanding Crumb's plight after losing her, he wanted to make peace in any way he could, but won't want to sacrifice his position. But alas, who is he to tell Crumb to surrender? In the end, the two sides must fight. But even then, Mustafa wishes the best for his fellow men-at-arms and asks for them to be spared at his expense. And yeah, you can choose to spare his men if you want to. A good way to integrate a defeat the boss mission as player's choice rather than something the story insists the main characters did. Usually with chemist archetypes, you're the one who had to comply with the enemy not accepting your offer of alliance. But in Mustafa's case, he's the one dealing with Crumb rejecting his troops. Even if you want to save Mustafa and recruit him, you know you can't, and frankly, you don't owe it to him. But by no means does that make him unsympathetic, because he still complied with it and gave the best fight he can give. For a guy who only appears in one chapter, he left the impact of an entire game. I gotta give him props for that. Also, can I just say, his design is so freaking good. With all the absolute eyesores coming from Awakening's villains, it's a blessing that we have this badass barbarian to revel in. I've been mocking the general quality of the modern villains up to this point, but for this game, you'll be surprised. Yeah, no joke, Engage, for all its problems, is a legit step forward when it comes to villains. Sure, they're not flawless or even that amazing, but at least it feels like the devs actually care about them as much as they do the heroes this time, without any crutches. To demonstrate what I mean, I'd like to cover two villains from this game that share similar elements with each other. Hyacinth, the wise king of Elusia, and Veil, the last child of Sombron. What do these two share in common? They're both brainwashed villains, and if modern Fire Emblem is anything to go by, it's that they really don't handle brainwashing all that well. But much to my surprise, these two turned out pretty good. Let's look at why. The deal with brainwashed villains is that we're supposed to feel bad that they were manipulated against their will by another evil force. The problem is that they keep being treated as any other bad guy, and there's often not enough gravity surrounding them for us to care about what they go through. Essentially, they copied Hardin's homework without understanding why Hardin works to begin with. It takes good writing and character development for them to actually come off as believable. And that's what these two did. Hyacinth on the surface seems like a Garen rehash. It's not even subtle how similar they are. But the reason why he works is because he doesn't have main antagonist level screen time. The story doesn't pretend he's more important than he actually is, and gets rid of him fairly quickly to make room for better villains going forward. And as a bonus, he's got a nice design and is presented astoundingly as a slick martial artist. So there's some actual appeal to him that makes us enjoy seeing him for what little spotlight he gets. Despite us barely seeing Hyacinth as the good king he's said to be, we can tell how much he means to his daughters given the legitimate emotion they have for him. Yeah, say what you may about Engage's writing and voice acting, but Ivy and Hortensia's voice and dialogue really captures the way they feel about how messed up their father became and the demise that follows him. It makes it all the more heavy when they do get to confront him one more time and put him to rest. A short conclusion, but strong enough that it's all we need. It's like they looked back at Garen and said, yeah, let's do that again, but not shit this time. And then there's Veil. Her brainwash takes the form of a split personality that divides her between a gentle, optimistic persona and a cold, sadistic one. She has an ample amount of evil presence that really sets her up as a fascinating central villain who will later be revealed as a mere puppet leader of the four Hounds, serving as the summoner of their army of corrupted. Because of her situation, she has moments of consciousness to reflect on the horrendous acts she did and make any possible attempt to help the main characters despite it. It's not just an angel-devil situation either. Good Veil can and will pursue violence to punish those who played her for a fool. She does suffer a little from her redemption being a freaking Gollum moment of all things, but that doesn't change the fact that she's a legit well-developed character who doesn't let brainwashing be an excuse for her to not amend her mistakes and become a stronger person. Better than how Danganronpa 3 does it anyway. Guys, come on, it's not a high bar to begin with. Regardless, these two set a pretty good example of brainwashed villains done right. Sure, they may not be as complex or personal as Hardin and Nurgle, but for what they set out to do, they still came out high and even improved on the modern era's mistakes in some regards. At the very least, they elevated my expectations for future villains from harshly negative to cautiously optimistic. Edelgard. Yep, I should know what I'm getting myself into when I made this. Some of you may already know that I am not a fan of Edelgard. She's a great villain and an amazing character, don't get me wrong. It's just that some of the roles she undertook really rubbed me the wrong way. But since this is a villains list, I'll shed some light on the aspects of her that I do like. You all know who Edelgard is, Adrestia's malevolent empress who hates the crest system, so she declares war against the Church of Seiros to change Fotland for the better. A lot of people like to compare Edelgard to Arvis due to them both sharing the mantra of Flame Emperor and how they believed in making drastic sacrifices to succeed. But honestly, that's kind of a disservice. Arvis is a spoiled man-child who felt entitled to rule Jargrill just because he believed he understood the world more than others, even though all he went through was that his mother went to get milk. Wait, is that how that works? Edelgard, on the other hand, actually does have a good basis. Between suffering in dark confinements for a big portion of her childhood and watching her siblings get experimented onto their deaths, she did not grow up a healthy princess. Considering she went through all of that just to become the Agarthan's perfect crest-bearing weapon, it's understandable how the mere notion of crests will traumatize her so much. Seeing what impact the crest system has on everyone else, she believes she has to give Fotland the wake-up call it deserves. Noble upbringings aside, Edelgard was ultimately swallowed by her own narcissistic complex. She will do anything and everything to abolish the Church of Seiros, believing they're the center of all of Fotland's problems, not realizing she's being lied to by the Agarthans. Her ineptitude to see reason beyond her own devotion became no better a hindrance to the lives of the people than what she claimed Raya to be. It gets to the point where she'd fully submit herself into becoming the very weapon she's made for. Even with the extreme mindset, her relatable devotion does make her a sympathetic adversary. It's all the more saddening considering there's no real way she could have been saved in this situation. The Agarthans have too much of a grip on her both physically and mentally that she's doomed to fall against the rational side of justice no matter what. Now, despite all of that, I didn't really get much enjoyment out of Edelgard. A lot of it came from the fact that she's a protagonist, so the game still insists that she's a hero in another story. And on that regard, she really tripped. To be honest, I don't have an issue with a war-driven protagonist, but in Edelgard's case, all it took was a couple of wrenches to screw that up. She still thinks it's a good idea to conspire with the Agarthans, lampshade the bombing of Aryan Road, and even framed Raya for it. If she was still a villain doing all of this, I won't mind it so much, but how the hell am I supposed to root for her after that stunt? I get it, she had to protect her reputation, but not facing even an ounce of consequence for it? That's total bullshit! Realistically, the Agarthans will absolutely own her by the end of the war given their far advanced arsenal. But nope, she conveniently beats them off screen. Her journey feels so artificial that I find it hard to buy the whole package. If only Crimson Flower isn't such a narrative clusterbuck. We should have seen how Edelgard not only ensures countermeasures against the Javelins of Light, but also some of her allies losing faith in her for resulting to voluntary slander. Yes, Fleesh, I'm looking at you. Stop standing around and do something. We traded flame for you! I know, villains list. These points really only affirm how prominent her role is as one. And I still agree, but that's about as far as she goes for me. She's a fantastic tragedy-driven villain who's so drowned in her own hubris that she didn't realize how close she flew to the sun before it's too late. But none of it works for a hero unless they really take the steps to make it work, and they didn't. You can have gleaming ideals all you want, but if you're actively neglecting a blatant threat to your cause, you deserve to lose. And no amount of Arvis brand crocodile tears is gonna change that. But hey, that's just my opinion. If you still think Edelgard is a good hero, that's great. The qualities are there, I just can't fully get behind it. Enjoy your morally grey warmonger. I'll stick to the other two house leaders. Woo! Yeah, baby! This is what I've been waiting for! Guys, you don't understand. I've been starving to have legit fun villains again in this series. Seeing Engage deliver the package this spectacularly felt heavenly beyond compare. The four Hounds are a group of worshippers to the fell dragon Sombron. They do his bidding of stealing the emblem rings as well as keeping his daughter Veil under supervision as she is brainwashed into doing their evil deeds. Now, evil cults are nothing new in the series, obviously, but what makes these four work is that each of them actually have appealing designs as well as their own personality and agenda. Zephyr is the de facto leader of the Hounds, a twisted mage dragon whose sense of family bonding is so toxic and manipulative, she makes the Joker look like a good boyfriend to Harley in contrast. She's also the one who calls the shots on controlling Veil and paving the path to Sombron's success, making her the main villain of the game. While she is my least favorite of the four, I still enjoy how diabolical she can be. You just can't go wrong with a good old-fashioned malignant witch. Marnie is the black sheep of the gang, being an eccentric young lady with abandonment issues and a penchant for swinging giant weapons. I just love the notion of a rotten little shit going around smacking people with her big ass axe. Hell, the skills she gets from Roy's emblem perfectly reflects that persistence. She's witty, hilarious, and she is voiced by Jinx. Enough said. Mavir seems like the resident chemist at first, as he is an honorable knight who serves the Hounds in Veil's favor. He can also be super scary to fight given how tanky he is and how he has access to warp states that make fighting him all the less predictable. While he lacks the group's psychotic thrills, he still deeply cares for what they have together, but is definitely above letting them betray each other. The fact that he didn't fall for the same obedience trap as most noble enemies definitely makes him one of the more likable ones. And last but not least... Oh, how can I possibly describe Gris? He's like if Angel Dust and Tyrion from Ruby raised a child together and abandoned him to care for his own. While he is the typical crazy masochist we love to revel in, he surprisingly has some grounded moments that show he cares about the time he spends as one of the Hounds. Hell, when he had to fight a losing battle against the heroes, he freaking plays hide and seek with them using Celica's Warp Ragnarok, which is just hysterical. And his design? What a gem to the eyes. Not since the Black Knight have I seen a villain design this badass in the series, and I could really use more. You wanna know something else? The Hounds actually accomplished what they set out to do. Gris managed to garner info of Aliar being a fell child, and Zephyr put that info to use by luring Aliar to where Sombron is so he can kill them and take their 12 rings. The Hounds won! Even with setbacks, they still have good contingency plans and succeeded where they needed to. As individual characters, the 4 Hounds are serviceable two-dimensional adversaries. They don't have layers of intrigue that Raya, Edelgard, and Berkut have in comparison. But what makes them really stand out is how well they work together, from chasing down the heroes with the dark emblems to consistently teaming up in each of their fights, using the emblems in legit threatening ways. I love seeing these 4 interact, and I love fighting them no matter how many times. I don't care if they're Saturday morning cartoon bad guys. Never before have I had this much fun with Fire Emblem villains, and I cherish every moment of it. While the reception on Engage appeared pretty mixed, I'm glad the game still poured its heart out for these villains. Here's to more cool and colorful ones going forward. Three Houses pushes the notion that anyone can be the villain of someone's story, especially given the conflict of the house leaders. While I personally prefer Fire Emblem to stick to the linear stories and villains, I do appreciate what this game sets out to do, especially given how they handle the conflict between the two major pillars of the story. We covered Edelgard, so now it's high time we give the spotlight to Lady Raya, the matriarch of the Church of Seiros. I put her above Edelgard, not because I think she's the bigger scum of the earth, but because I generally prefer Raya and find her more interesting to talk about. So yeah, Raya, a very fascinating character. During the dawn of Fodlan, her entire kin was massacred by Nemesis and the Agarthans, leading her to take revenge and swearing to restore order to the land. Since then, she established the Church of Seiros and gave Adrestia's emperor permission to establish the crest system. 1,000 years later, and the decay really shows. Fodlan becomes more and more corrupted as the crest system creates an unhealthy power dynamic among the people, and Raya is too busy punishing heretics to actually deal with all that. Now sure, punishing rebels who manipulate and harm each other to get what they want isn't a bad thing, but she's still a major matriarch in Fodlan. She definitely should have taken more action to deal with the corruption across the land. Granted, a normal person in her position will easily have their hands full, but she's a 1,000-year-old dragon. With all that time to plan and observe her surroundings, I don't think she has much of an excuse. Given her hyperfixation to protect her mother's legacy, it's really a matter of time before Edelgard has had enough and gives her the glorified eviction notice. The thing is, Raya is fully aware she's in the wrong. She knows she didn't have what it takes to help Fodlan given her disorganized mental state. Establishing the church was meant to be a temporary front as she performs experiments to bring her mother back and take charge of the land again. Unfortunately, she dilutes herself in the hopes of resurrecting her mother back so much, she turns a blind eye to solutions that are more practical. If she had just interacted more with the governing lands, she could have gotten so much more done. But as established, she is cuckoo crazy. Okay, jokes aside, I actually do like that they didn't just make her into a straightforward zealot who's just a strawman for some sort of anti-religion agenda. She's actually a fully fleshed out and sympathetic antagonist who deserves the limelight as an individual rather than an obstacle. A well-intentioned leader who actively neglects their responsibility can be just as bad as a villain who abuses their power. In a game that's meant to challenge your standard perspectives on a character, Raya exemplifies this notion really well. That said, I do respect Raya for actually taking incentive for her mishaps in the routes where she is more sane, rather than brushing them off as a justifiable means to an end. You still owe a giant apology to Aryan Road, Edelgard. Alright, as usual, let's have a look at the honorable mentions, what lack thereof. Cervantes, Awakening. Funny how this mustachioed joke villain gets a more dignified send-off than most major villains in this game. Kotaro, Fates, the only notable Hoshiden villain, who is also the Bowser to Saizo's Mario. Slate and Desai, Shadows of Valentia. While they're technically old villains, I appreciate the remake tripling down on your sliminess. Nemesis, Three Houses. Dragons and eldritch monsters beware, cause Bara's got steroids and he is after you. I have to be honest, it took me a while to give Shadows of Valentia a run through. So when I first saw teasers of Berkut, my expectations weren't high. I thought they were gonna play him completely straight and melodramatic as if he's another noble type enemy. But I was wrong. Boy am I glad I was wrong. Berkut is not only a very compelling character, but he's also downright hilarious. I don't even know if that's intentional, but it just works. Seriously, the first time we see him, he dances with his girlfriend in the middle of the capital he's busy conquering. It's so surreal, how could I not laugh at it? He's got the ego of 1,000 badgers to boot. Sometimes marching into war just for sport, dude goes around purging the Deliverance for fun. He's even cocky enough not to bring a whole army with him while doing so. Of course, he does get serious when it counts. He needed to live up to the expectations of his uncle as the heir of Regal's throne. And given Duma's covenant of strength, Berkut can't afford to come home empty-handed if he didn't want to disappoint anyone and be casted aside. As he gets defeated time and time again, Berkut gets increasingly more humiliated and unhinged, especially given he believed that Rudolph lost faith in him. It got to the point where he can't even trust his girlfriend anymore. Ultimately, he sacrifices Renea to Duma and makes her an extension of himself. The status quo has taken such a toll on him, he gave up love for the sake of power that he believed won't leave him. Even when Alm offered Berkut a chance to redeem himself, as he is the only family Alm has left, much of the damage has already been done. Berkut's only salvation is for Alm to end Duma's reign for good. If I do have one gripe with Berkut though, it's that his death is kind of schlocky. I would have liked it more if they focused on the plea between him and his cousin so that Alm has the time to really take in the gravity of his death and cry for him. But instead, they gotta shoehorn Renea's ghost in there so that she can comically forgive Berkut for killing her. I'm sorry, I can't be the only one who finds this a little narmy.
Berkut, please don't die. I can fix you.
No, and two for a gun.
It's okay, we are family. We can figure out how to get through this together.
Hi, I'm here to pick up my hubby. Okay, thanks, bye.
Oh, hi, Renee. Okay, you're cool now. Anyways, see ya.
What the fuck just happened?
All that aside, Berkut still feels like a complete package. He manages to be an entertaining and formidable villain with a background that makes his compulsive drive all the more believable. While the pre-existing story does give him a bit of a crutch, I'm glad to see there's still a legitimate highlight for better Fire Emblem villains going forward here. Edelgard and Raya took after the tragic yet unconventional, and the four Hounds really accentuated the fun aspects. And I owe their legacy to everyone's favorite Salt Knight.